Good afternoon to everyone tuning in to our Adobe Education Creativity Workshop, and this is our last workshop of 2018. For those I haven't met, my name is Clara Galan, and I work on our Adobe Educator communities here at Adobe. And today I'm really thrilled to be joined by Joseph Labrecque, who is a Senior Interactive Software Engineer and Adjunct Faculty at the University of Denver. And we were just chatting before this, and he's been an Adobe Education leader for 10 years. So has a lot of experience to share with you all today. Joseph, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, there we go. So can you see my slides right now?
Yep, I think we can see them great.
Okay, great. Because I can't tell. So bear with me as I go through this. All right, so this is Animate for Education, and I'm going to be talking about something that I talk about a lot, and that's Adobe Animate Cc. And I figured the first thing that we would do is just kind of go over some of the newer features that were released at Max in October, and then just go into some demonstrations of some of those features because, Animate doesn't get as much of the, kind of marketing and publicity that a lot of the other applications do, like Illustrator or Photoshop, or even newer stuff like XD. So, I wouldn't want this to get lost in that whole shuffle. So just, continuing to bring this stuff out, to talk about it, to present on it when I can. And a lot of this stuff too, I think is very useful for both, people who are teaching Animate, because the feature set just grows and grows, but also people who are working in all of the different areas that Animate touches, so web, TV, mobile, whatever, right? So we'll look at some of that stuff. First of all, so here's some additional information about myself. And I've got my contact information there too. Twitter is really good. There's my email address, and there's a bunch of different resources branching off of my website as well. A lot of that stuff is focused on Animate CC. So, if you're looking for additional resources, these are all good points to come out at, right? And thank you, Clara, for introducing me. I do work at the University of Denver as Senior Interactive Software Engineer. I work for a unit called Academic Technologies Consulting, which is a new unit on campus. But I also do a fair bit of adjunct faculty work, including the creation of different courses and certificates, and teaching on things like Photoshop, like Animate CC, and other things. So here is actually Adobe's sort of like official statement, their leading statement around Animate CC right now. They tend to kind of like shift it and change it every year around Max when they come out with a new version of Animate. And you'll notice with this particular statement that a lot of it does have to do with emphasizing the multi-platform aspect of Adobe Animate. So everybody probably knows this, but Adobe Animate used to be called Flash Professional. And when it was Flash Professional, of course, it was called that because it targeted basically a single platform, which is Flash Player. Eventually, it was able to target other things through Air, like iOS and Android and things of that nature. But, Flash created things for Flash Player, basically. With Animate, the reason they rebranded it and everything was because they made a whole bunch of different choices around the things that were to be supported by the application. So branching out from not just a single platform, actually going out to HTML5 Canvas, to making video really important, to asset creation through animated GIFs and SVG, and newer formats that we'll talk about in a bit, such as Webgl and VR and things of that nature. So the multi-platform story is something that's very important when considering Adobe Animate. These are actually a list of supported platforms that I pulled together from mostly resources that I got together for Macs, but you can find some of this stuff elsewhere too. And this is also something to understand about Animate, is that you have specific document types, but those document types, while they're tied to different publishing platforms, so like HTML5 Canvas, it's tied specifically to the native web. When you publish it, publishes stuff in HTML and JavaScript and so forth. Whereas with Flash Player, when you publish that, it publishes as Swift to be run in Flash Player. Export formats are a little bit different because they're not tied to specific document types. Sometimes they are, slightly, but most of these, something like an animated GIF, you can export an animated GIF file from just about any document type you create. You can create, a video from almost any document type you create. Whereas something like AMP HTML, which is not available quite yet inside of Animate, but is coming, that's going to specifically target Google's AMP HTML platform. So you can see there's a lot of different choices that you have when working in Animate. It truly is multi-platform. So some of the newer stuff that was added just a couple of months ago, one of the major things is that they completely overhauled the user interface, including what you see here is the start screen. It looks pretty similar to what you might see with Photoshop or Illustrator, where you've got a bunch of different categories and presets and things of that nature, and you can tweak like the width and the height and measurements and even other various things here and there. But that's been completely modernized, and within there they made a big effort to integrate Learn content inside of Animate itself. So this Learn panel can be accessed on its own through the application menu, or it can actually be accessed through the start screen as well. If we go back here, you can see that right underneath Home in the upper left is a Learn tab as well, and that takes you to that same thing. So what the Animate team did was they had myself and Chris Georginas, who you may know from his animation work and authoring, things like that. We both collaborated with the team to create a set of tutorials, so the video tutorials, and also certain sample files that you can access inside of the application. So this is a really good kind of starting off point in terms of learning Animate through the Learn tab. We have things like Lair Parenting. So Lair Parenting is a new way of working with, if you remember the old IK system, the inverse kinematics from like years and years ago, which is still available inside of Animate. It's very difficult to work with. Lair Parenting is a much easier way to create characters and rigs and things like that, to use that sort of thing to be able to move one piece of a rig and other pieces follow and so forth. So we'll see how to do that. You've got asset sculpting. So here is a vector horse, but it can also be used on bitmap images. And basically what you do is you create a number of different pins here, which you can see in white. And these pins will form a mesh over the object, which you can then manipulate the mesh, which manipulates the underneath object. But you can also animate this. So if you wanted to set keyframes and animate the horse rearing up or whatnot, it's entirely possible to do that using this new feature. We've also got automatic Lip-Synch. So here you're able to define specific vizimes based on the frames within a graphic symbol. And Animate's going to go ahead and, based on the audio file that you want it to tie it to, it's going to go out to Adobe Sensei and figure out exactly which particular sounds that are mapped to the Vizine should be placed at specific points in your timeline. So this used to be an entirely manual process, performing these sort of lip syncs. Now it can be done automatically. You may need to tweak it here and there, but I think it does a pretty good job. You've also got new formats like virtual reality. So this is actually an image that I took near my home, and I just took it with my Android phone, right? So most phones have a panoramic photo feature, and it was kind of shaky. I cleaned it up a bit in Photoshop, and you can just throw it inside of Animate, and there's a specific way to do it to make it so it's wrapped, either panoramic or 360-degree virtual reality document. And one of the really cool things about this is that you can actually have things animating within the document as well. You can have things that are interactive within the document and so forth. There's a whole API behind it. The virtual reality stuff, though, to note, is considered beta right now. So, some of those APIs could change as things grow. And here's just a big list of most of the major new features, including the ones that I just went over with images. So there are actually two additional Webgl Gltf formats, the standard document type and an extended. And the difference between both of those are that the standard Webgl Gltf format can actually be played in like anything that can play normal Webgl stuff, like the Babylon JS player or anything like that. You can just throw that in there. It'll play. It's very standardized. So, again, Animate trying to work with the standards, whereas the extended version is much more particular to Animate itself. So this is going to be actually a cleaner output from Animate in terms of animation, and it's also interactive, whereas the standard format isn't. A couple other things in here. You've got your actions wizard, and this is going to pop up a lot. And I think it's really good for learning how to make some of these things interactive. You can have the actions wizard, so instead of using the actions panel to just type out all of your code, whether it's for an HTML5 Canvas document or a WebGL document or a virtual reality document, whatever it is, you can use the actions wizard to actually make it a lot easier on yourself to learn this stuff instead of grabbing like a whole heavy documentation and going through it. This lets you actually choose, oh, I want to do this when somebody clicks this, and I want this to happen. It's very visual. So we'll try to see that too. As you can see, there's a bunch of different stuff in here. So
we have a quick question, Joseph, in terms of just functionality with the latest version of Animate CC. So do you need to have just the latest Mac OS version to run it?
I'm not sure. I don't think the very latest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you need Mojave to run it. But they did make some choices around pretty much all of the applications, not just Animate, that they weren't going to be supporting certain older operating systems. So I believe you actually do need Windows 10 to run a lot of the newer stuff. And I would imagine, I can't remember exactly which version of Mac OS you need to, but there are restrictions around that for sure.
Okay. And I know this question's from Jürgen, so I can reach out to the team to double check that to make sure which is compatible.
Yeah, and I know there's a resource like on the help forums or something like that that probably goes into that. I've actually looked it up before when that question has come up. I think it was during one of the edX courses. It did come up with Premiere Rush, actually. So I looked that up to try to figure it out, and it was pretty easy to Google and find. So just Googling it, I was able to find it pretty quick, but I can't recall exactly what the specifics were around it. But if anybody Googles it, put it in the chat or whatnot, and we can shout it out later. All right, so everybody should see Animate on my screen. Is that right?
So we don't see it. So sometimes with BlueJeans, you have to select the exact application.
Okay,
So then you can stop sharing your screen. Oh, now I see it.
cool. All right,
Perfect.
wonderful. So here is the new start screen. And you can see that we have the Home app here, or Home tab. And then here is that Learn tab that I mentioned as well. And you've got a whole bunch of stuff in here. There are many, many things, and they're actually adding stuff to this as we move along. So in the actual home area, you can, of course, open different FLA files. And that's something to understand, too, is that no matter which platform you're targeting, if it's ActionScript 3.0, if it's WebGL, if it's Air for iOS, HTML5 Canvas, whatever it is, it's going to actually create the same file type for you for your project. It's an FLA file, so a Flash authoring file. And one of the really good things about this is that because all of these different platforms, when you're authoring them, all share the same file type, what that means is that you're able to easily convert between document types. So if I have an ActionScript, or what is ActionScript 3.0 document, an FLA file that's written for that platform, and I want to change it into HTML5 Canvas so I can target the native web, you just go to File, Convert to, and then choose the specific document type you want to convert it to. But you don't have to do that. You can also go through and copy assets, copy entire animations, copy things from the timeline, copy layers, and paste them across all these different documents. So it's really easy to share that information no matter what platform you're using. So what we want to show here is that we've got a couple of different choices here. So if you're targeting character animation, social assets, if you're building a game, you've got all sorts of different presets here. Here's a specific one for education. But the advanced area here will display basically everything that you've got available to you per document type. So if you're coming to animate from a previous version where this is kind of what you always did, you didn't have these different choices here, these different presets, you just chose, oh, hey, I want to create an ActionScript document, I want to create a Canvas document, I want to create an Air document, whatever it is, that was kind of like your choice, right? So if you're used to that experience, or if you know the particular platform you want to target, this is a really good way to retain that workflow, even though the start screen is very, very different now. I'll mention too, before we actually open a document, that down here are a whole bunch of those different sample documents that are available to look at. So if you wanted to see, like, check out a VR panoramic 360 kind of thing, you can just double click on that and it'll open up a sample document where you can kind of see how things work. You can see things are animating. Certain objects here, such as the buildings, you see this weird little kind of texture wrap icon. These are only available in VR document types, and what they do is they specify specific layers to be wrapped around everything, whereas layers that don't have that, such as the starling bird, and I'm not sure where he is on here, somewhere, there he is, right up here. So that's just a normal layer, right? It's a normal animated layer. There he goes, and like that. So if we wanted to actually test this out, we could just go and window, and there's a new VR view, which opens up an interactive little window here. And sometimes the VR stuff takes a while to do whatever it's doing behind the scenes before you can start playing with it, whether it's publishing or doing this little view here. But basically, it'll come up, and then we just click and drag around, and we can see the different things going on here. So one of the neat things about the VR view is that you can actually move interactively some of the different movie clip symbols and things like that, some of the animated pieces, if you want them to appear in different places in the VR space. You can just click on them inside this VR view and move them, and you can see on my stage it's actually repositioning them here. And the reason for that is because when you've got stuff like wrapping around VR style, you've got like distortion taking place, right? And it's not as apparent on here, but let me go into, close this down, and oh, it looks like I deleted that. Well, oh no, here it is, Park. So Park is using my files, although I did delete them by mistake. That's not good. But I'll demonstrate anyway what you can do. Maybe if I go into my trash here, I'll be able to see. I've got basically a panoramic photo that I was using for that. I was going to bring it in. Unfortunately, I cleaned stuff up this morning, and I cleaned that up as well. But what we're going to do instead is we can just draw in here. So you don't have to use a photo that you import. I can actually go out to, let's say, 25%, and then just start drawing stuff. So if I choose just like a rectangle tool or line tool or something like that, actually let's choose the Paintbrush tool, and we'll make it green. And we'll change the stage color to something like orange-red. And if I do this, make the stroke really big, I should be able to create some neat stuff using some of the artistic vector art brushes that we have at our disposal now. I'm going to apply a vector art brush to this. And be thick enough. I just draw a nice wavy line there. Let's create a new layer. Draw another one. Maybe change to blue. And draw one more. Okay. So now we've got a bunch of wavy lines here. Like none of this is actually like panoramic yet, right? However, the stage is actually too small too. That's really easy to take care of. We just go to advanced settings in the properties. And right here, we're able to match contents. So right now the stage size is 550 by 400. If I choose to match contents, you can see it gets much, much bigger. And there we go. So let's actually go ahead and set all of these to textures. So I mentioned this little guy here, texture wrapping. We're going to use that for all layers in this case. So every one of these layers is going to be a wrapped texture. And if I go to my, oh, there's my VR view right here. And let's make it a little bigger. Actually, you can actually resize this window. And then hit launch. It'll go through and compile all that stuff. And then, I don't know how well you can see that, but we've got a total wraparound of all those neat colored streamers that I created with the vector art brush. So that's just some of the stuff you can do there. I mentioned as well inside of the actions panel, if we go ahead and choose add using wizard, you can see a bunch of different actions here, and these are specifically for virtual reality. So these are for this particular format. So those of you who may have worked in HTML5 Canvas before know that you don't have access to scenes in that file format, whereas when you're dealing with Flash Player, you do have scenes. One of the good things about this new file format, even though it is based on native web technologies, you can have scenes in this. So this becomes really interesting. You can make like a virtual walkthrough for specific buildings. Each scene can have its own sort of room wrapped around, and then you can place doors or windows or passageways at different places, and clicking on those can load the next scene, which again is a virtual environment. So that's some uses for that, which are pretty neat. I'm not going to save park. Let's go into our horse, because this is pretty neat. So right here, I've basically just got an SVG file that I brought into Animate. And you can just drag SVG files just like you would like an Illustrator file in here. And over on the side is the Asset Warp tool. So this is how you create a sculpted asset. You choose this tool, and then you just make different points. So I'll put a point right there at his ankle, and I'll just set one at each of these joints. And you can see how the mesh is built up from that. If we wanted to have his head be able to be shifted as well, put some points there. And of course, the more of this you do, the more complicated the mesh gets, right? So let's go ahead and actually create some animation out of this guy. I'm going to go to maybe the 1 second marker here. And if we right click, we can choose to insert a keyframe. And you notice that that keyframe, when the contents of the horse are duplicated, we have the warp points as well for the sculpted asset. So maybe actually I want to go backwards. So these things are all pinned right now. And if I go ahead and start moving some of these pins, and I'm doing this very quickly, you'd probably take a little more time than I'm doing right now if you're actually doing this for something, but this should give you the idea. I really enjoy using these. Okay, that's probably enough of that. I'll note too that there are a number of different options for warped objects here. For instance, you can show or hide the mesh, and you can change to fixed handles to open handles. And not only can you move these around, but you can also rotate. So if we were to go around the outside, you could get rotation on a selected object here, and you could actually rotate and warp it that way, which in this case isn't going to be very good. But all right, so now we've got these two different poses, right? So let's right-click on the frame span and create a classic tween between those two keyframes. And now if we preview here, you can see that we've got this bit of animation, and it's running a little bit slow just because it's doing it in the timeline inside of Animate. Let's actually run it as a SWF, and you can see he's got a little twitch in his ankle right there, which is kind of neat. But you can probably imagine that there's quite a bit you can do with this feature.
Yeah, we have
So there's
question.
Yes.
A question from Lucas,
Yes.
who joined in. Hi, Lucas. He asked if there are any good workflows in Design Interactive and Animate.
Any workflows for what?
InDesign Interactive, like interactive parentheses and Animate.
Inside of InDesign?
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't do a lot of interactive stuff inside of InDesign. I know you can export like an OAM file from like an HTML5 Canvas document and bring that into InDesign, but in terms of anything specific, that's not an area that I'm super familiar with. I usually use InDesign just for print layout.
Okay.
So I'm the wrong person to answer that.
He says, okay, thank you.
Okay. One thing that is really good, though, now that you brought up interoperability between different applications, this new version of Animate, along with the new version of After Effects, allows a complete FLA file to be just dropped into After Effects. you can import FLAs into After Effects from Animate. Whereas before you had to like render SWIFTs or create a SWIFT archive and put that in there. And you get complete control over all the different layers in that FLA file. So that's something for After Effects people to maybe get more excited about than something about InDesign. But yeah, close out the horse. And I've got 2 more little demos, and then we can go to discussions. Get that guy in window. All right, so this is really, really neat. I really enjoy this new Puppet Warp feature because it allows you to create a puppet out of the stuff that you're dealing with. So right here I have a skeleton, and actually this is pretty cool. So this is a skeleton I created for Adobe Max, and what I did was I just drew the skeleton on a piece of paper, and I used Adobe Capture on my Android device to vectorize it and bring it in through CC libraries as vector shapes. And then you're able to kind of cut him up and color him and create, as you see here, all these different segments of bone. So these are all different graphic symbols in this case, but they could be anything. When it comes to Lair Parenting, really the layers can contain anything, and they can contain multiple things. To activate this, what you would do is switch on this Show Parenting view. And once you do that, you've got this extra space here. So nothing's actually parented just yet to actually parent stuff. So we're going to take the skull, for instance, and we want to attach that to the rib cage. So you just use this little pick whip kind of thing here, and you drop. Oops, and I dropped it on the wrong one, but that's okay. I can just click and drop on the correct one, and now my skull is parented to the rib cage, because the rib cage is going to be sort of our main root. This is our prime parent, right, our root. For our left upper arm, we're going to pull that to the rib cage too. The lower arm we want to connect to the upper arm. The left hand we want to connect to the lower left arm, and so forth. So here we go to the right upper, and I'm not going to do this for the entire skeleton, but I will do it for both of his arms and his skull. And then we parent that to that, and so forth. So here's the pelvis, parent that to the rib cage. So you can see the structure that comes out when you create a rig like this using Lair Parenting. So what does that do for you, right? It's like, so what? So I've got the free transform tool selected here. And of course, I can rotate any of these objects individually, right? But I can also click on a parent object. So the right upper arm has 2 children. The children are the lower arm and the hand, right? Because these are parented, when I actually move the parent, the children follow along with that. So in this way, it's very, very easy to manipulate this thing and make different poses. The skull doesn't matter all that much because, you know, he isn't a he doesn't have multiple children attached to him right now or anything. But this is a really neat workflow that you can use to quickly go through and actually create different poses. So if I go, let's fill this out to frame 10. I'm going to insert keyframes here. And then on frame 10, let's kind of change everything, right? So I'm going to shift that down. I'm going to rotate this and this. I'll move its head a little bit. Maybe just kind of shift this down like that. So cool. Let's actually tween all this stuff. I'll create classic tweens between them. And once again, let's go ahead and test that out to see how it animates. So a little fast, but
very cool.
This is something that's, it's been a long time coming to animate. It's a much more accessible way to animate a sort of rig, a hierarchical structure of objects than what we've had in the past. And there's a less complicated version of this as well in the samples. Something that Chris made up. I'm going to redock my timeline there. And now if I
quick
go
question,
ahead.
Joseph, and I think you demonstrated some of this from
Yes.
Lucas, but can the rigging be done on the screen or only from the layers timeline? The layer/timeline.
You mean like from the stage here? It can't
I
be done
believe.
from the stage, like from the object itself.
Right.
Yeah. So if I open up that view right there, you'll notice what you can do is you can just click and choose. So you don't have to use that pick whip. You can always just click and choose what you want to parent to what. So that's an example, and I just totally screwed up his leg there because now that's parented to something else. Oh, it's kind of cool actually. Just kind of like comes flying out. I have to watch it because that's neat.
Nice.
Yeah, so this is where it's all controlled within the parent view here. Inside the timeline, what you can do and what I have done and what you should absolutely do when you're using this is go into like 200%. So you can see here, something I've done with the free transform tool is whenever you're manipulating things in terms of rotation and movement, it's really important inside of Animate to always set this little white dot called the transform point, because everything kind of moves and shifts around that point. Most of the time it's going to be at the same spot as the registration point, which right here is the very center of the object. But especially when you're dealing with like bones and joints and things like that, you definitely want to set that stuff up first, even before you do any of your parenting or animate. Let's actually close him out. No. And, oh yeah, so this bicycle is another good example. This is the one that Chris Georginas made. And it's not as, it doesn't have as many children and parents as my skeleton example does, but it's really smooth the way it works. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. I'm not sure if that's coming out okay because it's kind of big. I don't know if Animate like blew up or anything on your screens. Looks good? Okay, cool. Yeah, so this is like a really simple thing. You can see it's not like a ton of stuff going on here, but like this sort of thing would be really difficult to do if we did not have that layer parenting stuff. In IK, it's kind of a nightmare sometimes. And if you were trying to do it just by basic tweens or frame by frame even, it would be, it would take a while, right? So let's close that out. I think we really only have one more prepared sample left, and that's this little girl. Go ahead and reconfigure this a little bit to show how kind of the auto lip syncing works. So here, this is like a really simple thing. The only thing that really matters here are these two layers. We have an audio layer that the audio is going to live in, and we have a mouth layer. The mouth layer only contains a graphic symbol. It's an instance of mouth. So let's go ahead and double click on her mouth, and we can see that it's just a bunch of different mouth poses in here. Each frame's a different one. But where this gets really cool is when we add audio to it. Because of course right now if we scrub the timeline, there is no animation taking place. So inside my library I've prepared some audio. If I pull that onto the stage, then what we've got is this audio on the stage right here. What we want to make sure is that the audio itself is set to a sync type of stream. Now, the only document type that can use a sync type of stream is an ActionScript 3.0 document, but something like this, you're not going to be publishing this as a SWF. You'd be like creating this for animation. So you'd be creating this and exporting it to HD video for inclusion in some kind of like massive Premiere or After Effects project or something like that. So it's perfectly fine to use something like ActionScript 3.0 to do animations, right? And actually, if we go into File New, you'll even see on here that for character animation, all of these recommend a platform of ActionScript 3.0 because that's what animators use inside of Animate, because it's the most robust and native platform to animate itself. So you can hear the audio right now as I scrub, but her mouth still isn't moving. It is set to sync, stream, which is what we want. None of the other sync types will work with this. And what sync type of stream does is it actually like ties each little piece of audio to each specific frame. So if you're doing things like lip syncing, this is what you want because you can make sure that that's on target. So where this comes into some really cool play is when you select her mouth once again. And we've had the frame picker for a while. If I open that, you can see that it's got a bunch of the different frames that we have in there. And that's great. You could do this manually this way by just clicking on different frames, depending on what she's saying. However, if you choose lip syncing right under there, we get something that looks a little similar. And what you have to do is go through and click on each one of these. So here's the ah sound. And that's mapped to ah, which is frame 11. Here we have and that's mapped to frame 6. And so forth. So you set up your Vizime to make sure that the specific frames that are going to be used to map the mouth movements to in sync with the audio are actually set up correctly. Once that's done, you choose which particular audio layer you want to sync to, and you hit done. So as soon as I hit that, it goes out and it does it for me. And let's kind of look here. You can already see her mouth has changed a bit. Let's blow this up a bit so we can see it a little better. You can see here's a neutral expression. Here she switches to ah. There's woo, and so forth. So this has gone through and done this like really fast for us. And if we go ahead and test it, so she recites a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe there for us. So this really improves that kind of workflow. And if you're doing stuff with any kind of animation for video, I mean, this is pretty invaluable in terms of saving time, whether you're a student or a professional. All right, and I think that's about it for the stuff that I wanted to kind of talk about here.
And so, one more question on the auto lip sync from Mark. So does the auto lip sync work for original characters' mouths, or are we limited to the mouth shapes in Animate?
So the Vizime is kind of like a standard thing. Let me open that up again so we can see the mapping. Yeah, so like if you like Google, mouth poses, Vizimes, or something like that, they can look however you want them to. I just kind of stole this one off of a character animator model, actually. So I took assets from a character animator rig, and I ripped out the mouth, and I converted it to a graphic symbol inside of Animate, because I didn't want to draw all these myself, but you absolutely could draw them all yourself, and they wouldn't have to look exactly like the particular standard kind of expressions that you usually see. You could do anything you want, of course. I think that might answer it. Okay, cool. So, should we, if anybody has any other questions or wants to see anything specific, um, let me know, or else I'm free to just go into, discussion or whatever anybody wants to do.
Great. Well, Joseph, for those who are watching the recording, if they have more questions, how can they best get in touch with you?
Right. So let's see. Actually, maybe if I do it through here. Sorry, I'm getting used to this. Um, where did my Chrome go? I'll find it. Because I've got a slide with some contact info on it. There it is. Oh, hello. Yeah, so these I get in touch with right away. So email or Twitter. You can also get in touch with me through other means, which are all listed on the web there. Well, actually, you probably can't see that because I didn't share it.
Switch
Sorry.
the application. It's all good. I know it's a little bit tricky because it just will show that one
Okay,
application.
oh, there we go. I had to stop sharing Animate. Okay, I get it. And
There we
now
go.
you should see it. Okay. And if I make this big, it should be easier to read. Yeah, so any of those are good ways to get in touch. Yeah, perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joseph, for taking the time and joining us today and sharing more about Animate, and looking forward to all the feedback from everybody else.
Right on.